Hey everybody out there in comic book land. This is Chuck Dixon, back to talk to you once again about what it is I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's get right to your questions. Brian from New York, who doesn't want me to use his real name. You'll have to figure out which Brian from New York he is. There is a debate existing for decades among Batman producers and enthusiasts on how to correctly pronounce the name Ra's al Ghul. I searched for an interview of Denny O'Neil, creator of Ra's al Ghul, saying the name. I decided in whatever way Denny pronounced it, it should be definitely correct, and as a result will be how I pronounce it. Unfortunately, I was unable to find such an interview. As someone who worked at DC Comics with Denny O'Neil, can you please once and for all put an end to this debate and tell us how Denny O'Neil pronounced the name Ra's al Ghul? Well, I pretty much already told you. Now, when I was a kid, I thought it was Ra's al Ghul. I don't know why. I added the more sibilant or less sibilant S on race. But this question actually came up at a Bat Summit when we were talking about the character, and somebody asked Denny, how do you say his name? And Denny said, Ra's al Ghul. And he said it's a play on words or pun or whatever. To him, it was Ra's al Ghul's, and that's how he would remember the name when he first started writing it. So there you go. Ra's al Ghul, right from the horse's mouth. That's how Denny said the name. Jared Mitchell. Hey, Rev. When you think over your prolific career as a writer, how has the older Chuck Dixon grown or changed from the younger Chuck Dixon? Well, I still have the same enthusiasms. I really haven't evolved as an adult beyond the age of 12 emotionally. And my interests. I still love comic books and cartoons and toy soldiers. And I really haven't grown up that much. Although life's taken its shots. Life's hardest lessons are learned firsthand. And I hit every branch of the tree of knowledge on the way down as I fell. So for the most part, I'm the same person. Just more mileage. And yeah, I've learned a lot along the way. I've learned the craft of writing comics. I knew the language of comics, but didn't know how to translate it into stories of my own until I spent years trying, basically working at it, working up proposals, and then finally working in the industry. But even when I was dropped right into the deep end of the industry, like I said, I had learned the language of comics. And I had learned scripting from Bob Kanigher, who basically just gave me one of his Sergeant Rock scripts, and I learned comic scripting from that. No better teacher that I can think of. And then, along the way, mentors, Larry Hama, Denny O'Neil, Archie Goodwin, people like that. And, reading stuff on my own, reading stuff suggested to me, and just thinking about my craft, thinking about what makes a good story. And then the rest, relying on those two tools that every writer must have: confidence and ignorance. You just sort of go at it. You just start writing your story. As P.G. Woodhouse once put it, you just start writing and you just don't give a damn. And that's what you got to do. I don't know if it takes guts to be a writer, but it certainly takes ignorance. So there you go. Essentially, I'm the same person. Less hair. Tommy Bagley. Let's get familiar. I wonder if the 1960s bra-burning women's lib movement also played a part in kneecapping the female readership for romance comics. Yeah, I think it did. I got this question. I thought about it quite a bit before answering it. Now, legend has it that Gloria Steinem visited the DC Comics offices and suggested that they change Wonder Woman to make her more of a feminist ideal, more of a modern 20th century gal, rather than whatever it was she was before. And DC made the disastrous choice of abandoning her classic costume, her classic one-piece bathing suit, basically, and her boots, and her tiara, and her wrist bracelets, and her lariat of truth, her lasso, and sort of remade her as a spy character, as a girl from U.N.C.L.E. kind of deal. And enormous failure in sales. Wonder Woman was never a sales giant anyway. And so they immediately, they kept the look, but they turned back to that unpleasant old aspect of Wonder Woman, bondage, to try to sell some copies. They turned her into a helpless victim. Is that the end result? Is that the end of the road for feminism? You know, women are ultimately devalued. Yeah, so huge failure, sales-wise, creatively, all the rest. I'm sure Gloria Steinem wasn't happy. And so they just went back to the way things were done before. And I think part of the impetus for that was the Wonder Woman television show, which had absolutely no interest in having Wonder Woman run around in a pantsuit. So they turned the clock back, and you know, the classic Wonder Woman, the classic Amazon of old, returned. Now, why the romance comic died, I don't think it has to do with feminism. I think it has to do with the sexual revolution. That things were happening in the 60s and into the 70s, and romance comics just seemed sort of old hat. They seemed forced and dopey, and, you know, their time was over. They seemed naive. And the other reason why romance comics began to fail was because as the fanboy editors who had taken over both DC and Marvel, you know, turned to horror and superheroes, and mostly superheroes, they kind of gave short shrift to the romance comics. So they published them, but they were no longer given the attention that they had been given before. And the stories and the art suffered. And, you know, readers aren't stupid. They realized that the quality fell, and the sales began to fall off, and eventually there weren't romance comics anymore. So I don't think we can blame Gloria Steinem or Helen Gurley Brown or anybody else for that. I think it's just attrition, culturally, and the creative bankruptcy of the romance comics in the shadow of the superhero books. Now, as far as female readership, girls continue to read comics. DC had a lot of success aiming comics at female readership with their quote-unquote mystery magazines, which were thinly veiled horror comics. And they directly went for like gothic romance and things like that, producing comic books at a higher price range, 25 cents, that had covers that looked like Harlequin romances or other paperback romance kind of things. And they had quite a success, with that kind of stuff. But comic book sales overall began to decline. And as DC and Marvel's fortunes fell in the 70s, the other companies fell with them. And comics that girls may have read, like Dennis the Menace, or Wendy, or Casper the Friendly Ghost, and things like that, their sales fell along with DC's and Marvel's to the point where their publishers simply stopped putting them out. Archie continued on because Archie had its own niche. Although Archie ran into trouble in the 70s, had to go to like specialty publishing and things like that, reducing the amount of books they were doing. But they survived through the robust sales of the digest books, which I imagine still do well. I still see them at my local Publix, and there's new issues every month. I imagine that those digests in that impulse aisle do quite well. And of course, Archie comics have an enormous female readership. I think girls continue. I think kids read them when they're younger. Sometimes their only exposure to comics is at the supermarket impulse rack. But I think girls read Archie a little bit longer than boys do. Boys kind of outgrow Archie, and girls, they still have some kind of interest in that eternal triangle between the three. But I think what really put a dent in readership, female readership for comics, beyond lower sales and dwindling quality of the work itself, was the arrival of young adult authors like Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume. And these women wrote novels aimed right at tweeny girls, right at the heart of the female comic book readership. And I think they stole an awful lot of readers away, because girls found they found these books better written, more relatable, funnier. It was more what they were looking for. It was the more of the kind of light entertainment they were looking for. They were no longer really getting in comics, because of the fanboy editors running the two big companies, they were very much changing to a boys-only medium and leaving the girls behind. But girls discovered these books, which were sold through the Weekly Reader and through Scholastic at their schools. They were easy to pick up, they were inexpensive, they were engaging, and they enjoyed them. And they were the first real new entries in young adult fiction for girls in a long time. I mean, for decades, it was Nancy Drew or nothing for girls, pretty much. And here came, Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary with, a fresh perspective, new stuff, and I think it took a lot of girls away from the comic book racks and drew them over to the paperback racks. So there you go. Just a theory, but I think it's a good one. But yeah, I love that question. That was a great question. King Hyperion 89. All hail the king. Why are some graphic novels that you've written worth insane prices online? Batman Cataclysm and No Man's Land Volume 4 are priced pretty high. Well, I don't see a dime from these. Because they're secondary market. Book goes out of print, I don't see any more money from it. So I feel your pain. And I see crazy prices. I mean, like Marvel's epic reprint series. If you don't pre-order that, you're going to pay dearly. If you miss one of them and you wanted it, you're going to pay an arm and a leg only a few months later. So I don't know what's going on at Marvel. I guess reduced print runs or whatever. But I have a better idea what's going on over at DC. DC has a strange culture where they feel their best days are behind them. Once they published Return of the Dark Knight and The Watchmen, they just announced, almost officially, to all of comicdom, particularly to their creators, that this is it. These two books are the pinnacles of the comic book medium, and nothing will ever duplicate them. Nothing will ever come close. And so DC operates in the shadow of these two monoliths that they created for themselves. Now, I'm not arguing for my own work, but certainly a lot of projects have come out of DC since Watchmen and since Dark Knight Returns that are equal or better than those two books. But DC is wedded to this idea that this is the high watermark. This is the benchmark. From here, comics just get worse. And they just sort of buy into that, and it extends to their reprints. That there are a lot of stuff that just should stay in print all the time. But it's they don't do that. I mean, Watchmen's always in print. Return of the Dark Knight, Batman Year One are always in print. There are literally millions of copies out there of these books in all various formats, hardcover and oversized and omnibuy and absolute editions and everything else. And they'll keep reprinting the same thing. And there's not a lot of sense to it. That I remember when Scott Beatty and I wrote Robin Year One, and I said this should have trade dress that matches your current Batman Year One. So it's a bookshelf, and we should do more of them. Every DC character should have a Year One, done by a top creative team. And at the time, Scott and I were a top creative team, working with, Javier Pulido, Robin Year One. It's a killer book. We worked really hard on it. It's a killer book. And I said, look, I'm not saying that it's on a par with Batman Year One, although I thought it was. And it was a Robin story. Batman Year One is a Commissioner Gordon story when you really get down to it. But anyway, I digress. I thought, from a marketing standpoint, wouldn't it be great to sell and keep them in print all the time? Never let them go out of print, because these are your 101 books. These are the guide to each of these characters, and you should do you should do Flash, you should do Wonder Woman, you should do Green Lantern, all Year Ones, and have a whole bookshelf of Year Ones. Now, Scott and I eventually did Batgirl Year One, and we did Nightwing Year One, and it all kind of ended there. It was just lost on them. They thought the hubris we were showing by daring to compare our work to Batman Year One. And it's like, come on, guys. I mean, can't we aspire? Can't we aim higher, to do that? And even if we don't, even if you think that Robin Year One and Batgirl Year One are vastly inferior to Dark Knight Year One, Batman Year One, you should still market them together, and we sold great. And we would have sold even better if we had constantly remained in print. And if we had constantly been marketed along with Batman Year One. Make it a thing. Make it a bookshelf of books. They do this in Europe. And they do it in Europe very successfully. But for some reason, DC just thinks these are our darlings and anything else is second best. And we're just not interested. I mean, a good example is another thing Scott Beatty and I worked on. We worked on the Killing Joke event. It was a cross-company event. They have never put out a complete edition of it in the United States. They do in Europe. They don't put out a complete edition of it. And yet, over and over again, I see World at War, which was a Superman crossover done just before Last Laugh. I see that recollected all the time. There's an omnibus, there's an absolute, there's a this, there's that. It's constantly being reprinted in complete format. It's a huge crossover. It's always an expensive book. But World at War, while they promoted the hell out of it and thought it was the best effort they had done that year, didn't sell anywhere near as well as Last Laugh. Last Laugh outsold World at War, I think it was Our World at War, for, by magnitudes. But again, they get it in their head. This was successful. This is inferior, and that's the way we're going to go. But it's not based on numbers. It's not based on earnings. It's not based. It's like nothing's based on earnings since the 90s. It's all just theory, and it's not run like a business. Is what I'm trying to say. To the point where the recently departed editor-in-chief at DC excoriated a crowd at a convention because they said they liked dollar comics. They liked these facsimile reprints of older DC books. And this editor-in-chief was outraged, mostly because the facsimile books were outselling the current titles. And he thought that was wrong. No, he was wrong. Because your audience buying the books, they're the ones telling you what they want. In other words, they wanted comics more like the comics that were being reprinted in the dollar comic editions. More like what was being presented to them in the facsimile editions. And didn't want what was currently being produced. They wanted the old school stuff. They were telling DC, please return to the old continuity. Please return to the old traditional iconic characters we love in the form that we love them, and have creators work inside that format. Instead, the audience is wrong, the fans are wrong, we're going to do what we want. Dwayne Thomas again. Had the company not preceded your career, do you think you would have enjoyed writing for Charlton? If you could write one Charlton character, which would it be? I'm going to guess Peacemaker. Yeah, the only contact I ever had with Charlton was I wrote to their editor-in-chief at the time, which might have been Nicola Cuddy, and I suggested that they try to get the Dr. Phibes franchise, which he wrote back to me and said that they were trying to get that franchise, the Vincent Price movie franchise, because I just thought it would make a terrific comic. And I had ideas that if they got it, I would, travel up to Derby, Connecticut, and, put my name in to maybe write it. This was in the 70s, long before I became a professional writer, and long before I was ready to become a professional writer. But that's my only brush with Charlton, other than reading the comics. As far as which character would I write, I'd go right into the Ditko-verse. I just love Steve Ditko, idolized him. He's the reason why I work in comics. He's the first creator I really paid attention to when I was a kid. And I would create a Ditko-verse of The Question, Captain Atom, and Blue Beetle. And of course, Blue Beetle I got to write quite a bit when I was at DC. I did a lot of Ted Cord, and I really dug it. But it would be neat to write a Ditko-centric universe of characters. And that's what I would do. Peacemaker, I don't even know that much about, frankly. I don't remember reading any Peacemaker. I remember Vengeance Squad. I always liked the title, but the book looked boring to me. But I dug Charlton Comics. Anytime Ditko worked. I mean, I love Gorgo by Ditko. Gorgo's my favorite big monster movie, rubber suit monster movie. And having Ditko do the comic when I was a kid was like, whoa! It's like two of my favorite things together: peanut butter and chocolate together in one comic book. Ashley Crunk. Since the New 52 rebooted DC's continuity, Tim Drake has kind of been a wasted character, especially in the light of recent news. DC doesn't seem to have much enthusiasm for him and certainly don't know what to do with him. Yes, they don't know what to do with him, so they did something horrible. I'm going to get to that in a future video. Just before the reboot, there was a fun little moment that suggested that Tim might take Batman's place as leader of the Outsiders. DC obviously never had any intention on actually doing anything with this, but I'm curious to know what your take would have been. Could a book like this work, and how would you handle this kind of series? And Ashley provided images, which is great, because I would never have been able to find these. Apparently, this is the scene where Batman takes Tim Drake down and introduces him to the Outsiders, and he gets to meet them. It'd be a lot of fun. That would be a whole lot of fun to work on. Tim Drake leading his own supergroup, the tensions over the difference in age and him having he worked so hard to prove himself as Robin, and now he would have to work hard to prove himself basically as a stand-in for Batman to lead this, disparate group of oddball heroes. And it'd be great to write like the first 12 issues as a long epic arc in two parts, in which, Tim Drake proves his worth to the group, basically earns his place as the leader of the Outsiders without question, because he's certainly capable enough, certainly smart enough, but he would have to learn some lessons about human nature and adult interrelations and things like that, and also the dynamics of the group. Because the cool thing about the Outsiders is they were always, they were like the Marvel's Avengers when it first started out. A group that wasn't that unified, that has problems, internal conflicts, has differences, likely to break up at any moment. And Tim Drake would have to ride herd, basically, herding cats to keep this group together. It'd be a fun book to write. It'd be challenging. It'd be interesting. Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat if I felt like it. Wilson Chang. Graham Nolan recently did a YouTube video regarding work for hire in comics. Would you be able to bring any insight on any differences in work for hire agreements between DC, Marvel, and the other comic companies that you work for, such as CrossGen? Well, DC is the better of the two between DC and Marvel. DC, because of because of Neil Adams in the 70s. Neil Adams pushed for creator rights, and he had somebody willing to listen to him in Jeanette Kahn. And from Jeanette Kahn, we go to Paul Levitz running DC, and between the two of them, they began to introduce deals where if you created a character for DC, you had some degree of creative control over it and some participation in any monies made from the character in ancillary rights. If they made a toy, a movie, a TV show, put that character on a pair of underoos, the creators, the first person to write them and the first person to draw them would share in a percentage of DC's licensing profits. Marvel never had anything like that. Now, it was still work for hire. Work for hire means you do it and they own it. Marvel's work for hire policy was so ruthless that it was printed on the back of their paychecks. So if you did work for them and endorsed the check, you were signing a contract every time you cashed a Marvel check. But anyway, more on DC. So DC's participation, it was a big deal. We were getting royalties. We were getting a piece of the licensing if you were lucky enough to have one of your characters move on to another medium or move on to be a toy or a game or whatever, a Lego minifigure, whatever it would be, you would get a piece of it. Now the Lego and the game and the toy deals still stand the way they always stood. The ancillary rights for movie and TV, that's another thing. In the 2000s, the new editor-in-chief, the guy that didn't like dollar comics, he renegotiated the terms of TV and movie with the parent company, Warner Brothers. If you'll notice, Warner Brothers makes all of the DC character movies and TV shows. I mean, Paramount and Columbia don't make anything with the DC characters. Warner's makes it all. And because Warner's makes it all, they have a brand new sweetheart deal where they don't have to pay as much for the licensing to DC, which makes DC poorer financially, and it makes the people who work at DC poorer financially. We just don't see anywhere near the money from TV and movie that we once saw or once could have seen, which is sad because, when the going was good, when the money was good, there wasn't that much out there. You had, for current creators, you basically had Bane, and you had some of the Vertigo characters, and that's it. And those creators made money while the sun shone, and then the deal was renegotiated, and there was a lot less money coming in, which again is sad because so many characters, so many creators of characters are still with us, still owed money, still have participation agreements, but the checks are much smaller than they were in the 90s and the early 2000s. Why DC did that, I don't know. But I will tell you this. Paul Levitz and Jeanette Kahn would never have done that because it would have screwed the company over and it would have screwed the creators over. And they never would have done it. Why it was done, I have no idea. I guess pressure from Warner's and somebody gave in. Somebody blinked. Now, over at Marvel, it's a pretty raw deal. I just found out recently how raw a number of Marvel creators are beginning to come out publicly and complain about how little money they've seen. Makes me feel better about the money I've made from Bane. Because some of these creators have created characters that, went on to be in, lots of movies, netting billions of dollars for Marvel Productions and Disney. And they're getting a one-time check in the four figures. And that's it. And then special thanks in the credits. That's it. That's pretty sad. That's pretty sad because at DC, the deal is ongoing. If they use your character, they use Bane in 6 movies, they got to pay me and Graham Nolan 6 times. The same amount. Also, DC is beginning to pay for story content. So, every once in a while, I'll get a payment for a story element that they use in the movies or the television shows. And it can add up because, if you've produced as much work as I have, they're mining my stuff, but they're paying me for it. Over at Marvel, you don't get any of that. I mean, they took an entire scene that Johnny Romita Jr. and I did from The Punisher and used it in the second Punisher film. I mean, it was exactly what we did in the comic, and we got nothing. We didn't even get a special thanks. We got zip. And I don't think Marvel has any intention. They're starting to be a little better with the television shows, paying by episode, doing repeat payments. But for the most part, they use a character in a movie, it's a one-time payment and you're done. And it's a pretty sad payment when you compare it to the billions of dollars they're making in the films. Now, CrossGen, the deal was a whole different thing. Basically, everybody who worked at CrossGen was a shareholder. Think of it as a Viking longship, and we were all pulling an oar. So we were all going to the same place, and when we got there, we were going to be rich. So that was the plan. So if one of our comics got made into a movie, we would all benefit. So everybody was pushing for everybody else. I mean, if something got optioned or something was being looked at by a student, we were happy for those guys. Because not only were we happy for those guys because they were our comrades working together shoulder to shoulder to make comics, but also if they were successful, we would share in their success. And that was the deal. We were all going to be a part of it. But of course, it all came to nothing. As I said to Mark Alessi a number of times, we were rowing for shore as hard as we could, and we just didn't make it. The shoreline just kept getting further and further away. So, unfortunate. Now, any creator who gets any money, be it royalties, participation, or whatever, should get down on their knees every night and thank Dean Mulaney. Dean and his brother Jan created the creator-owned model for comics in America. They created the creator-owned contract, a contract that lapses after 5 years and all rights return to the creator. The royalty schedule, the ancillary rights schedule, all of these things that were created by Jan and Dean. And they were continued by Archie Goodwin at the Epic line at Marvel. Epic was created as a creator-owned line to compete with companies like Eclipse and draw creators, the best creators, to Epic with the lure that they would own these properties, that they would have a share in them, a say in them. And Archie used Eclipse's contract. The Epic contract is almost indistinguishable from the contract that Dean wrote for Eclipse. After 5 years, things elapse. The rights go back to the creators. The whole thing, the ancillary rights schedule, everything. So Archie continued on with that. And of course, when Archie got to DC, was also a staunch defender of creators' rights. Ted Adams at IDW, who I met as an intern working under Dean Mulaney, continued this at IDW. I've done creator-owned work for IDW, and the contract is the same contract that I signed with Dean Mulaney. It just has a new letterhead, IDW instead of Eclipse. So these are the people, I hear about images, contracts, and everything else. I don't really see anything there that I like. They're not as elegant as clean, as clearly stated as the original creator contract that Dean Mulaney wrote, Archie Goodwin used, and Ted Adams continued. IDW to this day uses, that model of a creator-owned contract. So the thing about work for hire, though, is, if you want to work in comics, they got the money, they got the characters, they got the exposure. You got to go to them. And why would you work for hire? Because you want to get in. You want that break, and you love the characters, and you love the medium. That's how most of us did it. We all got in. Everybody got burned. Everybody got burned on their first jobs in comics. I don't care who you are. Nobody steps into it and gets a good deal and is happy with the money they got. Everybody gets screwed when they first get into comics. As Jack Kirby said, comics will break your heart. You got to get over it. You got to get it hardened. But the worst thing, the worst tool, the worst aspect of people who do work for hire publishing is they use enthusiasm. They use the enthusiasm of their contributors against the contributors. They'll dangle some big project in front of you, and you're like, oh, I've always loved Doodah Man. I want to do, we'll give you a Doodah Man miniseries, but we'll own everything, and you won't make a dime afterwards, and we're going to pay you a crap page rate because you obviously want to do it so bad. And, comics isn't the only medium that works this way. Children's books works this way as well. When I was in children's books, I once asked for a raise, and I was told no, because there's a million elementary school teachers who could take your place in a heartbeat. Because every elementary school teacher thinks that they can write children's books. So, we don't need you. We're going to use you, but we don't need you. And that's the thing with comics. They use your enthusiasm, and as long as you're making them money, you're gold. The minute they think you're over or somebody better comes along, you're out on your ass. And that's work for hire. And then it's over for you. If you work for hire and that's it, it's over for you once they stop giving you the work, once they stop hiring you. That's why pioneers, Neil Adams, Jeanette Kahn, Paul Levitz, Dean Mulaney, Jan Mulaney, Archie Goodwin, Ted Adams, these people are the only reason that a lot of comic book professionals are able to retire, quite frankly, and retire comfortably. But, you still got to watch your butt in this business or you'll get a raw deal. Levi Sweeney, what do you think of slice of life stories? What do you think of the idea of a slice of life comic featuring the civilian members of Batman or Spider-Man supporting cast? For example, Jim Gordon, Lucius Fox, Alfred, their families for Batman, and Aunt May, J. Jonah, and Harry Osborn for Spider-Man. Do you think such a story would be appealing to a significant demographic of readers? I learned early on in the business, and I was told this more than once, to treat every comic as if it was a reader's first comic. And I don't think anybody reading an Aunt May story as their first comic is ever going to pick up another one, no matter how good that Aunt May story is. You pick up a Spider-Man book, you want to read about Spider-Man. If you pick up Batman, you want to read about Batman. Now, slice of life stories are great. I remember at Marvel, they hated them. If you pitched, everybody wanted to pitch slice of life stories because they seem interesting and they seem to enhance the character and they're easy to write. And Marvel would just reject them outright. Basically, you'd be shown to the curb if you in the late 70s, early 80s, if you presented a slice of life story. But I don't mind slice of life stories that are about the lead character of the issue. For Detective 711, my editor, Scott Peterson, insisted that the book open in a convenience store. And I began to think, well, why would Batman be in a convenience store? I mean, other than to stop a robbery. And doesn't that seem sort of, wouldn't he let the cops take care of that? I mean, there's never going to be a moment where Batman is the customer in a convenience store. It didn't make any sense to me. But I thought, well, what if we did an issue that Batman doesn't appear in, and the whole issue is about Bruce Wayne, but it's very much a Batman story because Bruce Wayne is presented with a series of challenges that he has to confront and overcome as Bruce Wayne. So he has to basically act like Batman when no one's looking, but everybody else thinks, oh, that's just Bruce. He's just being a gadfly or a playboy or whatever he is. But really, the readers can see he's thwarted these criminals. He's saved the day, but no one will ever know it, behind the scenes. And so that's what I did. And I think it's one of Graham and my most successful collaborations and resulted in, undeniably Graham's greatest Batman cover. I love that cover. And I remember that Scott Peterson and Darren Vincenzo, who were editors on the book, they were delirious with this issue. They just really loved it. And I think we did a good job. But it was a slice of life story for Bruce Wayne. Now, again, Scott Peterson said he wanted a kind of slice of life story where Nightwing and Robin, Dick Grayson and Tim Drake, get to hang out together. They wanted a hangout issue. And we would learn more about the characters and, some interesting funny byplay and blah, blah, blah. They didn't want the action in the story, but I put action in anyway. This is Nightwing 25, and it's a book I sign a lot of. And when I sign a lot of a book, it tells me that it was popular. People like it. They responded to it. But again, I put action in it, but there's a lot of byplay, a lot of exposition, a lot of stuff between the two characters. Scott wanted character building issues. Now, over at Birds of Prey, I think Jordan was still editing the book at this point, and he wanted the same kind of thing. He wanted to have characters meet and interplay. And again, it's a slice of life story with Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon. But there is action, but not violent action in the way there was in the Nightwing 25. And Birds of Prey is possibly the most popular issue, and the one I get asked the most about of all of the work that I did at DC Comics. And it's a romance story, it's a love story, it's inspiring, and it does explore the characters and their relationship and everything else. So it's very much a slice of life. It's a day in a life story. Now, The Punisher, when I was on The Punisher, I wrote lots of slice of life stories because my favorite kind of Punisher story is where he deals with quality of life crimes, a term Rudy Giuliani used. In other words, the kind of crimes that affect us every day, the kind of crimes we get sort of ticked off about and wish somebody would do something about them, and The Punisher would. And I wrote one where he is stuck at a drive-through at a fast food restaurant when a robbery happens, and he's got a you ever been at the drive-thru? There's no pulling out. You're stuck, until the next window's open. And he's sort of stuck there, and there's this huge shootout. So that kind of stuff is fun. Punisher is made for slice-of-life stories. If you've ever seen the movie, it's sort of a fan-made movie, but Thomas Jane is in it as the Punisher. It's called Dirty Laundry. You can find it easily on the internet. And it's very much a Punisher slice-of-life story, very much like the kind of stuff that I wrote for Don Daly back in the day. Wednesday Serial. I don't understand how you think you're blacklisted when you did Bane Conquest not that long ago. Okay, I see what you're doing here. Okay, you don't understand. Yeah, I think you do understand. And you're implying that I only think I'm blacklisted. Like somehow a figment of my imagination. What is a blacklist? Blacklists are usually about shunning someone who doesn't agree with you politically. That's what it comes down to. There's a famous Hollywood blacklist in the 50s where a bunch of communist writers were denied work in Hollywood because they were communists. And I don't mean they wore Che Guevara t-shirts. I mean they were working for the Soviets, which is something that doesn't get reported on that much. Well, anyway, yeah, there's a political blacklist. And for some editors, I was on their political blacklist. But there's other kinds of lists, and I was on a few of them. And everybody at some point or another gets on that other kind of list because editors are a prickly bunch. And editors have people they like and people they don't like. But blacklists are real. I'm not the only one blacklisted at DC and Marvel. I'm just the most visible, and I'm just the one who will talk about it. Now, the problem is, in the 70s, I worked with liberals, and I worked with conservatives. Mostly, I worked with editors, and I had no idea what their politics were, because nobody gave a damn. But, it became important for some reason in, 1998 on. There's very much a political thing going on at DC, not so much at Marvel. And in the 2000s, it gets worse. Part of the problem is that DC and Marvel were being run by a clique of guys who all went to the same comic book shop when they were kids. Literally. These guys all knew each other as, fan geeks back when they were teenagers. And now they were running DC and Marvel. And they were all of a mindset. And the thing is, you can... cliques are always going to be a thing in comics. They were. I was in, the Larry Hama clique at Marvel. And then other guys were in, the Mark Grunwald clique. And that's just going to happen, and usually you can't move from one clique to the other. You find editors who like you. I had Larry Hama, I had Archie Goodman, I had Carl Potts, I had Marcus McLaurin, I had Don Daly at Marvel, and they liked me and they used me. Nell Yomtov was another one. But the other writers or the other editors wouldn't go near me. So I was on, their crap list. Not a blacklist, but a crap list. It wasn't a company-wide thing. Each editor was able to hire whoever they wanted. But as Larry Hama once told me, he said, your stories make sense, your characters are likable, and you hand your work in on time. They're never going to forgive you for that. And he meant the other editors. They didn't like that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of craft, that kind of dedication, that kind of earnestness. Larry did. Larry dug it. Other editors didn't. They had other parameters. When we move into the 2000s, you've got editors who won't hire you if you don't listen to the same music they listen to. So it's not always political. It's cultural. Basically, they want to hire their friends, and that's what happened. You get a lot of people working in comics who maybe don't have any business being there, but they're friends with the guys running the show. And they've all known each other for a very long time. Now, as far as blacklist goes, yeah, it's a real thing. As Tom Brevoort once said, the man pictured here, who apparently doesn't understand what words mean, he said publicly that Chuck Dixon is not blacklisted, but he will never work at Marvel again. So there you go. Now, when I was at DC, after Denny O'Neil retired, I was told by other editors, some high-ranking editors at DC, that a number of editors at DC Comics didn't like me. But they couldn't fire me because my books were selling well. I was doing 4 monthlies, and they all sold well. Paul Levitz once told me that my books were a bellwether for the company, that if my books' sales declined, it meant the whole line was declining. If my sales went up, it meant the whole line was going up in sales. So you can't get rid of somebody like that. But Paul Levitz wasn't there forever. He left and another editor took over. And the editors that didn't like me, and this was told to me by a number of group editors, when the new editor-in-chief came along, these editors that didn't like me went to work on my reputation. And in every opportunity, at every editorial meeting, talked about how I was unreliable, uncooperative. I was basically a huge prima donna, a big crybaby, and impossible to work with. And this, of course, I was no longer working at DC. So I wasn't there to refute this or prove anything. So the new editor-in-chief had no other recourse than to believe them. And so when I was invited to return to DC, I was under a cloud already. And I didn't last very long there because this cloud persisted. This reputation, this undeserved reputation preceded me. And I was once again blacklisted, kicked to the curb. Now, throughout my career, I understand about clicks. I understand about ending up on a crap list. But I wanted to work in comics. But I'm not a schmoozer. I wasn't going to get by on charm. I wanted to get by on the merit of my work. And because of that, I avoided most social contact with the people I was working for. I was happy to hang out at cons with people I worked with, but I didn't want to have a lot of contact socially with the people I worked for, because you never knew, you might say something they didn't like. I once said to an editor, I liked the movie he liked, but I didn't like it as much as him. And he didn't want to work with me anymore. He was wounded by the fact that I didn't love his favorite movie as much as he did. And I guess it's because that's the kind of people that work in comics. I don't know. But the end result is I didn't go to the company Christmas parties. I didn't get involved in company events and conventions and things like that because I thought, hey, I'm going to open my mouth, say the wrong thing, and I'm going to be on somebody's crap list. And I don't want to be. Okay? So I would just do my work, keep my head down, hand my stuff in on time, and just hope that the sales of my books would justify continued employment. And that's the way I saw myself going forward. Because like I said, I'm not a schmoozer. I was never going to charm anybody into giving me work. I had to prove that my work was good and that readers liked it. Now, I was so well regarded at DC in the 90s, when Paul Levitz was running the place, that myself and Klaus Janson were invited to DC to give a seminar to the editors on what it was like to be a freelancer, what the life of a freelancer was like, to tell them what they didn't know. Now Klaus, super well regarded, probably the best liked guy in comics. Klaus is just a ball to hang out with. He's smart, charming guy, mega comic book talent, and just knows the industry backwards and forwards. So of course they invited him. They invited me because I was writing 4 monthlies, well regarded by the Batman office and everything else. And so here I was, forced into a situation. Couldn't say no. So I'm forced in a situation where I'm in a room with a whole bunch of editors, and I got to give my opinions. And they're asking questions, and Klaus and I are giving frank answers about what it's like to be a freelancer. And a lot of our answers surprised them. But all of our answers, we were in agreement with each other. I don't know Klaus that well. We worked together quite a bit. I liked the guy a whole lot, but it's not like we were best buddies. I didn't know what his feelings were on any of these subjects, but we were simpatico throughout this entire seminar. And it lasted a whole afternoon with this room full of editors. But boy, oh boy, did I end up on a bunch of crap lists that day. I got into it with an editor, arguing with him about stuff, and I saw other editors like, who the hell's this guy? And I was like, oh my God, I've ended up where I didn't want to end up. I ended up in the lion's den, and now these people don't like me, So outside of the bat offices, I was persona non grata after that, for the most part, except some of the younger editors would hire me to do stuff. But I basically confirmed the senior editors' already entrenched opinions about me by giving my opinions on various stuff. Now, that brings us to the 2000s, when I made my brief return to DC to write Batman and the Outsiders and a short run on Robin. And I was told, I said, I'm enjoying the work and everything else. I want to keep working here. What are you guys looking for? And an editor said, well, if you really want to keep working here, you need to come up here on Wednesday nights. I said, Wednesday nights? What's Wednesday nights? He goes, it's karaoke night. And the editor-in-chief holds a karaoke party. And I thought, that's never going to happen. I am never going to come up here, and basically dance for the master, humiliate myself in a karaoke night. I mean, no way. There's no way I'm going to do that. And I never did. And of course, I think that's the reason I was fired, because I wasn't willing to be, party monkey. And that led to, more of a blacklist. Because like I said, I'm not a schmoozer. I'm not the kind of person that gee, boss, you're a genius. I remember the first time I met Dan DiDio, we got in an argument over the industry, because what he was saying was demonstrably wrong. And I wasn't going to be quiet just to get work. And at that time, I didn't get any work. I don't understand why, a couple of years later, he hired me again. But, which brings us to Batman Conquest. Batman Conquest was not an end to the DC blacklist. I can't tell the story of Batman, of Bane Conquest here, because it's not because I signed a non-disclosure agreement or anything else. It's kind of like the Sherlock Holmes story of the giant rat of Sumatra. Dr. Watson decided the world was not yet prepared to hear that story, and so we never knew what happened in Sumatra with Sherlock Holmes. Suffice it to say that the reason why Graham and I returned to do a 12-issue maxi series of Bane involved a lot of lawyers. It didn't have anything to do with basically DC. We weren't invited. It was a condition of an agreement. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But, recently I've been invited back by younger authors to do an 8-page story here and there. It's sort of stunt casting. But there's no way that I'm welcome back at DC for the variety of reasons I've already given. And also, a lot of people say you weren't blacklisted, you just aged out of the industry. Well, if I aged out at 47, which isn't that old, because that's when I got on the blacklist. And, and it's public, it's real. I've had lots of creators, lots of editors tell me, it's real. You are on a list of people not to hire. So it's not that I think it is. It's not that you don't understand something. It's real. And it's real in any business. I mean, grow up and think about it. The people in charge have their prejudices, and they're the ones who do the hiring. And their parameters, their criteria for who they hire and who they don't, are not always about business. They're not always based on merit. They're based on their personality, their worldview, what they like, who they don't like, whatever. But don't think that Bane Conquest was any kind of reapproachment from DC, because it was a one-time, unique deal, and will not be repeated. So, anyway, on to happier things. I continue to work. I'm not blacklisted everywhere, because I still got readers. I still have an audience. I still have people that want to see what I'm working on. And what I've been working on a lot recently is Arctoons. If you go to arkhaven.com, you will find Arctoons. It's a brand new digital comics platform. It is free. It is as free as the bird. It's as free as the air. It's as free as the water coming out of your tap. And it's in high res. You can read these comics on your big screen TV in your living room. It is crystal clear visual quality. There's a genre for everybody. There's humor, there's horror, there's action, there's fantasy, there's sci-fi, and there's superheroes. And there's a lot of genre mashups you never imagined you'd ever see. So why not check it out? ArkHaven.com. Look for Arctoons and start reading one of them. I guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you're going to find something you like. And you're going to want to follow every week as new episodes drop. So check it out at Ark Haven Comics, Arctoons. That's it for me. I think this was another long one. These things are turning into epics, marathons. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see all of you down the road.